I'm going to be talking about what I think you should be spending your money on the next time you go into a game store or order things online. And I'm not necessarily going to be talking all that much about more miniatures and more paint. Because I'm a bit of a curious type of a person, but also because I run this channel, I've ended up buying quite a lot of different type of things. Some of these things are things that I've, been using pretty much for every miniature I've been working on, or when I've been working on terrain. And some things are, stuff that really, really helps out. And I thought I'd share these with you so that, the next time you go into a game store and you've got some money to spend, you can think about maybe getting something else than another bottle of paint or another miniature. These tips and recommendations are going to be in a completely random order, pretty much sort of just wherever they are in front of me. I'm just going to pick them up and yeah. Painting handle. At first, I spent quite a long time using old Citadel paints with some blue tack on them and use that as a painting handle. I like this better. This is from Citadel. There's other brands that make painting handles. The good thing is when you got a really sort of firm grip, all of a sudden half of my sort of shakes disappeared. I was able to relax a lot better while painting when I had a decent painting handle. So if you've sort of got a bit of an issue with shaky hands and things like that, this is excellent. And if you're painting with kids, this is really nice for, I got one for my son and he can really sort of get a nice grip of when he smudges way too much paint on his miniatures. Varnish. I'm not going to say what type of varnish you like. You might want to have a matte finish or a satin finish or a glossy finish. But there's sort of two sides to varnish. One obviously is protecting your miniature. If you're new to painting miniatures and you're sitting there right now painting your first army, when you start putting that on the table, you'll be surprised how fast all that hard work you put into it starts wearing off. So that's, it's great for protection. Secondly, it's nice to have like a uniform finish all over your miniature, because usually if you're using different paints, like say you use washes and normal paints and maybe some contrast paints and things like that, they all usually have different finishes. Some might be matte, some might be glossy. Covering your miniature with the varnish will just even all that out so they've all got the same finish. If you're really into sort of making fancy stuff, you can also use varnish to sort of enhance certain effects. Paint your entire miniature with the matte varnish and then put a glossy varnish in its open mouth and it'll look like the mouth is wet, say if it's a big dragon or something like that. I prefer matte varnishes. This from Winsor & Newton, professional matte varnish, is the most awesomely matte varnish I have been able to find so far. But it doesn't really protect all that well for things that go on the table. So maybe for sort of if you've got a display piece or something like that, then this works fine. Otherwise, I've got this acrylic matte varnish from Vallejo, which, it can take a bit more scratches than this one. Paint remover. This doesn't necessarily have to be something that is, this is specifically made by Green Stuff World for sort of miniature-based things. A lot of people just use all kinds of different chemicals in different ways to strip paint off miniatures, and that's fine too. I think what I want to talk about really is, you find a nice way that you like to strip the paint off your miniatures. If you're not already doing it, at some point you're going to want to repaint something. You might be ordering miniatures off eBay because they're cheap, but they come painted and you want to strip them, things like that. So look into whatever you want to use as a paint stripper. Mixing balls. These specifically are from Army Painter. They've got a nice sound to them. You put one of these into your bottle of paint and it helps you shake the paint and mix it well. I can't emphasize these enough, how well they work, but also how important it is to shake your paints properly, and this, this really helps. There's tons of different ways, I guess, that you could be using to, shake your paints, but so far this is the most efficient way. Toothpicks. A scrap miniature. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you haven't got all that many miniatures, I know usually that's a problem that remedies itself after you've been in the hobby for a while. But I've got this fellow lying right in front of me pretty much all the time when I paint. And if I want to try something, if I want to see how a color works, if I want to, test a varnish, anything, I just pick this fellow up and I double whatever paint or whatever I'm doing, on here. And I think this fellow has been stripped from paint at least 3 times, and he's always just around and helps me out with my decisions. So if you haven't got all that many miniatures, then maybe just buy one really cheap off of eBay or whatever, or ask your friend if you can, you never painting that one, can I have it as a scrap miniature? And Crackle paint. Basically, it's paint that when you paint it out and it dries, it sort of cracks and crackles. It looks like, the dry, cracked earth, or anything. And it's a wonderful texture. This is from Green Stuff World. They've got 3 different ones, I think. I like these because they come in a big bottle and they got cool names. This is Martian Earth, and the other one's called Mojave Mud Crack. But I believe a lot of different brands make, this kind of stuff. And I've used it on, I think, pretty much every single base and every single piece of terrain, even on trees, anything. Just, it doesn't have to be specifically that you want cracked earth. It's just giving you a texture that, I find awesome. A wet palette. This is actually filled with paint and water. That's why I'm holding it so delicately. If you don't know what a wet palette is, I just really want to recommend it. And it's not necessarily something that you need to go buy. You can make your own wet palette with things that you've got at home, if you've got a plastic Tupperware type box at home. And that's what I was using for a very long time, or like, a year or whatever. But this was actually given to me by a subscriber on YouTube who was probably watching. Tack så mycket Rasmus, det är väldigt snällt för wettpaletten. But it just helps your game immensely while painting with water-based paints. So, please give them a look. A small book. Everything you do when you paint miniatures, it's a really smart idea to write them down. If you're working on an army and you start out and you've got a color scheme going, you've got what paints you're using in what order, you paint 10 of them, and then all of a sudden you've got tons of work to do and something else happens, and then you're not painting them for like 2 months. And then you go back to start again and you realize you can't remember. It's really common. So you have a book and you write down your recipes in it. You can also, if you want to, like I've done here, is every single paint I've got, I've painted it out, I've written what name it is, and, well, that was a blank page, and there's another blank one. I'm leaving blank pages so I can buy more paints. But, I've got all my paints in here, so that if I think, I need a sort of mossy green, and then I can have a look in here instead of shoveling through my bottles because I haven't got a proper bottle rack, whatever. But, needle files, pretty much small files, great for mold lines or whatever. And usually you can use a knife to sort of scrape off your mold lines from your miniature, but it's really handy to have some files lying around. Teeny weeny drills and one of these hand drill things, whatever they are. It's not really all that often, but pretty common that you have sort of barrel pipes. You have maybe some other places in your miniature. Usually I can have, like recently I was working on my orcs and they have skulls going here and there. But the skulls that are supposed to, stick on their armor, I sort of drilled holes in the eyes on some of them because it was like one eye. Anyway, I've been using them a lot more than I thought I would. And if I would have been playing a futuristic type game, then, is there is there a miniature without a gun that needs its barrel to be drilled? Brushes. Now, obviously, you've already got brushes. And there's cheap brushes and there's expensive brushes. What I would like to say is that, at least if you haven't, give yourself a chance to experiment a little bit with brushes. If you've got a little bit of money left over, maybe buy a different type of brush than the one you've already got. Say if you're buying the one brand, they're too far away, but say you buy Citadel brushes. You could try and buy a brush from another brand. You could try and buy like natural hair. This is like expensive Winsor & Newton finest sable type brush. See if you like them. Or like a cheap brush, or a brush made for watercolors. There's so many different types of brushes, and I think it's worth, if you've got the extra money, is just try and buy a different brush from the one you've already got. Because all of a sudden you might, really find your own holy grail of the type of brush that you like to paint with. Brush cleaners. On the subject of brushes, if you do buy brushes, which you would be doing if you're painting miniatures, you should be taking care of them. There's plenty of different ways to clean your brush. This was also given to me by Rasmus, by the way. Tack igen. But I've also got this brush cleaner from Vallejo. I usually clean my brushes in this, and then I use this. But whatever you prefer, like you can use shampoo or conditioner or soap or whatever you've heard someone else do, or whatever you think is best for your brush. The important thing is that you do clean your brush and take care of it, because there's no point in buying these expensive things if you just ruin them really fast by not cleaning them. Different types of paint. When I said this, I mean, obviously you've got some paint going and you might be really satisfied with what you got. Then you won't ever go buy more paint. Perfect. Most of us buy more paint than we need. But what I would like to advocate is, for one thing, try different brands of paint. So you've got Citadel paints, you've got Vallejo paints, you've got Army Painter paints. Vallejo's got like 3 or 4 different ranges of paints. You've got like these things, Formula P3 from Privateer Press. What have I got here? Christoph World makes paint. Scale Colors Fantasy range. There's all these different brands of paint. And, if you're painting a miniature, you say you've got only Vallejo colors, or you've got only Citadel colors. And, I need a new red. I need this specific red. You could just go try buy a different brand and see how you like it. While you're at it, while you still need that red, try and find it from a different brand and try your way around, because they're all fairly different. And it's kind of interesting to try out the different brands and see what they do. And while we're on the subject of paints, what I also mean with paints is like try different types of paints if you wish. There's oil paints. Nowadays there's water-based oil paints. Don't ask me how that works. There's pigments. There's these things which are apparently liquid pigments from Green Stuff World. All these different things can be rather fun to experiment with. So if you're in the game store and you're going to buy 5 different types of paints for the new miniatures you're painting, maybe you think really hard, do I really need the 5th one, or could I just buy a random bottle of paint for number 5 instead? And that way you get to try a way around all the different things that literally are available to you as a big resource. But are you using it? Are you getting, yeah, you see what I mean. just, experiment a bit. But on that subject, because I know I started the video talking about things that I've been literally using a lot that I really recommend. The last sort of about paints was more philosophical, but pigments. Definitely recommend you checking out Pigments. It's a wonder on bases and things like that. And just if you want to make things look a bit rusty or grimy or dirty, Pigments. Blue tack. One of these things, I think it's called a pipette. You put it in water, the water comes up. I use it every time I paint, either for adding water into my wet palette if it's sort of not enough, for getting different washes out of their bottles, or anything. If you are using a wet palette, there's paints that shouldn't go in your wet palette. Shouldn't. I got one of these things, and I need to clean it out better. But for things like washes, contrast paints, oil paints, I put everything in these. I think they're called a cutting mat. Not just for sort of, if you're building terrain and you need to cut things and stuff like that, but I use it as my, I have this underneath when I paint, just to protect the table underneath and whatever. And these are easy to sort of clean off and things like that. And it doesn't really matter if you can't clean them off. They're sort of made to get dirty and grimy. And, especially if you're like me, where maybe you don't have like a hobby room or a basement where you can have a specific desk that, it doesn't matter if it gets dirty. Maybe you're like me and you're on your living room table. Then it's really easy to just have this, take it out, put it down, and you don't have to worry anything about the surface underneath. And if you're into terrain, then you can cut lots of things off with this underneath. Tufts. If you haven't tried them, please do. It took me a little while to sort of go like, it's just, what's up with Tufts? And then I started using Tufts and I would not go back. Tufts is basically, it's supposed to look like grass or whatever. Tons of different brands make tons of different types of tufts. These are from Army Painter. Sort of, I like them because they have weird colors. This is Deadland and Highland tuft. I like tufts when they're not sort of neon green, personal preference only. But tufts. The last one is a bit weird because I can't, I could. Maybe I can. Lights. And this is a bit of a tricky one. That's about the same, yeah? What's your lighting situation like? And is it worth buying a better light or a lamp? I'm not saying you need to buy anything fancy. I'm just saying that you should maybe think about what you use as a light and if it's good or if it's bad. I haven't got anything sort of specific. I got sort of lamps that are made for filming and photography because obviously, as you can see, that's what I'm doing. But in practice, my light that I use, which is that lamp, I just lifted out. I took it in and then out. Anyway, it's a bit too sharp, if you want to call it that. So when I paint under that light, everything looks more contrasty and more saturated and it pops more. And then when I take my miniature somewhere else and look at it, it's a bit dull looking. I have that sort of in my head, so I know it. So sometimes I just go to the window and look at the miniature and, compensate. But it's worth, if you just got a small sort of desk lamp, maybe that's not the best lamp to use while painting, and it might be worth considering, getting something else. And I'm not going to say what that is, because it's all about size and budget and things like that. But it's worth having a think about that the light you're using while you paint is really important. So that's some of the things I think you should look into buying. next time you intend on spending money on your hobby, that isn't sort of necessarily another miniature or, you know, stuff that you normally would have bought. There's obviously things here that I haven't mentioned that when you get into another price range, when you're sort of hobby growers, it might be an airbrush, it might be a hot wire cutter, it might be a 3D printer, all these things. Now, there's reasons why, obviously, I don't talk about these because it's a big investment. But also, and this is where this video sort of takes a bit of a rambling turn for everyone who's made it this far. Good on you. Here's the bonus. Now, this is my hobby space. I've been asked a couple of times if I could just show, you know, what my hobby space looks like. And it's basically the end of my living room table that I've hijacked. And I don't have a fancy paint rack with all my paints in it. I don't have to have any sort of fancy brush rack or fancy thing to have my water in it. And why I'm sort of mentioning this now is because this hobby, like any hobby, can easily spiral out of control. And you're not going to get any better at painting just because your paints are in a nice holder. If you paint a lot, obviously it's nice to see them. I get that. But it's not really a necessity. And it's not really a necessity either to have an entire room where you can do your hobby. It's really nice. I would love to have like a hobby basement. It would be awesome. I wouldn't, because basically, as you can see, it's my hobby space. And when I film, this is where I film all my content. I have one camera and I have one light. It's the same light I use when I just paint normally. And when I film this, like you can see me now, I move that camera on the same tripod and I move the light, which is on the same tripod. And we're still in we're still in my living room. And then when I'm done, I have to pack it all down or move it back. And this is all still possible. It takes more time than, you know, I would love to have 2 cameras and a room with everything set up and I just have to press record every time I want to say something. But I don't. But I still make it work. And the same goes for the sort of hobby. You shouldn't feel restricted because you don't have lots of stuff. And my sort of, you know, I think you should buy these things. Yeah, it's just to be sort of helpful and share my experiences in things that I use on a very regular basis so that you don't have to go and buy, you know, something really unnecessary. Well, I've only got the necessary things here. But can't find anything unnecessary. Sorry. I was going to try and make a point. Didn't work out. But I'm just, I want to just say that, you know, if you're new to the hobby, you don't need tons of things. And you obviously, please go ahead and experiment and try and buy lots of stuff. But don't let it put you back. And don't say sort of, if only I would have had an airbrush, then I could paint better, or if I had the space to have an airbrush, then I could buy an airbrush. And then, you know, just try and figure out what your situation is at the moment and make it work. Like, even if you want to film videos, all I've got is a camera that's facing straight down about, I don't know, it touches my head usually. So it's about 50 centimeters up. And I've got a little lamp over here. It's the cheapest sort of photo LED lamp. They look like this. It's called Aperture. I got one of these with a bit of white stuff on it. And to be fair, a really expensive camera because I had one already. And when I want to take photographs, I take the same light and I take a piece of paper and I just sort of bend it like this and I put the light on there and then I use my other really expensive camera. Sorry about that, but you could be using your iPhone for decent result. And voila, if you want, you can start making YouTube content. And hopefully you're funnier than I am because I don't think it's really that difficult. But I told you there was going to be rambling, and I think I should stop rambling now. Now you see my hobby space. I didn't really want to show too much because it is my living room and I haven't cleaned it in a while. But you know, please just hobby on, regardless of what your situation is. We all dream about having a basement and an airbrush and a 3D printer and a hot wire cutter and all this awesome stuff, but it is not necessary. We can strive towards it if it's a goal and try and make it happen, or if it's just about getting miniatures on the table quickly, we can strive to make that happen. Or if it's just to paint the one miniature really awesomely and win an award, you can make that happen at your living room table as well.